So the cybersecurity industry has been, in some ways, a wonderful opportunity to really start to rethink some of the controls, some of the technologies that are being used. I think for us as implementing companies, there's been definitely a bunch of challenges. The first couple of weeks of the lockdowns really where it's like, how can I actually make sure that my employees can still work like at all, right? It's like, I mean, there were simple or seemingly simple challenges like, does everybody have a laptop? It's like, no. It's like some people didn't. It's like, how do you get laptops out there? It's like in a time when there was really a shortage of laptops because everybody needed one. It's like going over monitors, webcams, right? It's like the whole nine yards. There's a lot of those kind of trivial things.
Welcome to the Ivy Podcast, Gerald. I'm so happy to have you.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. It's like, this is fun. It's like, I'm really enjoying this.
All right. For our listeners that don't know you, why don't you give us a brief introduction about yourself and your role and how you ended up in information security?
Yeah, I would love to. It's like, my name's Gerald Beuchelt. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for Sprinklr. We're a software as a service company focusing on marketing, tech automation. And it's like, I just recently took up this position. So don't be too hard on me in terms of like what's going on. It's like, I'm still learning, which is part of the experience. I got into this. What's that?
I'll take it easy on you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Perfect. No, it's definitely been a long journey for me in many ways. It's like, it's been super interesting to see how information security, how the information industry in general has been changing over the last decades, literally. I started out in actually pre-sales kind of situation a long time ago, which was something that I would actually encourage anyone, but it's like, especially working in security, to really do at some point in their careers, mainly because that gives you an appreciation for customers in terms of how to deal with stakeholders, et cetera. So it's like, I think that was a really important part of the step, but really getting into information security, I got over time, first focusing on interoperability between different systems. And if you look at interoperability, then security often plays a pretty crucial role in terms of moving those things forward. I then got ultimately into hardcore security by ways of identity management, which again was something a little bit more of a interoperability kind of a play initially.
Uh-huh.
But then dug deeper and deeper, and then now been at my third software as a service company, doing the CISO or chief security guy role, which is obviously something that is particularly important for software as a service companies, given that customers trust us and our systems with their processes, their data, and their critical kind of business interactions that they need to do. And I think that is really important to keep in mind, that software as a service really needs to establish that trust with our customer base and then maintain it over time.
You recently moved to Sprinklr after spending time with LogMeIn as a Chief Information Security Officer. And I think this is the perfect timing for us to have this conversation, because transitional leadership is something that's very crucial to the success of any company that somebody may be taking over, having transitioned from a previous organization. Talk us through some of the challenges that new leaders face when they transition into a new organization, and also the best practices on how to effectively deliver on key strategic goals.
Sure, love to. It's like, I think the key element here is to really understand as early as possible and as deep as possible what that business is really about that you're getting yourself into, right? It's like, I mean, always feel strongly about the ideas that in order to be able to create a good security program, a good security strategy for any organization, you really need to understand the business objectives, the mission goals, whatever that organization does, to the last T. Because it's like, if you do not align a security program with what the company or the organization is truly about, you end up missing the biggest point. It's like, because we're not doing security just for security's sake, or because it's important, or because somebody else told us to. Well, sometimes we do, but it's like I mean, it's like at the end of the day, it should really be aligned with what the company does, right? So understanding the business is, I think that is the first. This is something that anyone who's in transitioning from one role to another should be probably doing as they go through the initial interview cycles, right? It's like, I mean, it's like you got to figure out, is like, is that a company that I feel comfortable with? And that was definitely something that I felt strongly about when starting to talk to the people at Sprinklr, starting to look at how they've been building their business and what their overall objectives are. So that's the first step. It's like really that happens long before you even start to transition. It's like then as it gets closer, it's like one of the things that I've done and that I would recommend everybody is to start reaching out. It's like start reaching out to the folks you'll be working with. Start having some discussions if you can afford that. In as far as timing goes, start to really dig one level down in terms of like what's the organization look like, what's the culture at the company look like. How are the people actually interacting with each other, and what do they think about security? It's like both the security team, but also the rest of the organization, right? It's like, for example, software as a service, privacy is something that's important. How's the legal team structured? What do they think about security and privacy? How does sales think about that, right? It's like, what is important to them? Do they see a lot of requests for security related conversations or not? So really start to dig one level deeper. Obviously, you have to understand the technology. There's no question about that. But one of the things that I always like to say is like people, process, technology, literally in that order. It's like start to understand the people, start to understand the processes, and then also start to understand the technology that you're dealing with as you move forward. That should get you like right to where you start. It's like, and then once you start, it's obviously there's so many recommendations from the Gartners, the Forresters, and the analysts on the planet. Literally, it's like, well, how should the first 100 days for the CISO look like? And a lot of those are really good. It's like most of those have similar kind of general approaches. Assess the organization, make relationships with the people that you will be dealing with on a personal level. It's like to really understand how they tick and what they need from you, and then really start as you move along. It's like start to draft a strategy in terms of like what is most important. Look at the crown jewels of the organization. Is that systems? Is that processes? Is that data? Is that business relationships? I think all of those can be relevant in this context. And it's like you really have to understand how you want to protect those things, and also start to really have a serious discussion about things like risk appetite and tolerance. Right? It's like for fast-growing businesses that are moving quickly and that really do not have a lot of time because there's a lot of market pressure on them. You may have a much bigger risk tolerance than large established businesses that have a lot to lose, right? So you really want to find out from a leadership perspective, from a board level perspective, where are those lines being drawn? It's like, what's the minimum risk appetite? How much you're really pushing for people to take risks, and what's the top level where you say is like, this is getting a little bit too problematic. It's like all of those kind of things really need to happen almost in parallel, right? It's like, and then as you move forward and as you go in, depending on the size organization, you want to pull in some outside help as well. I would never claim in a million years that I understand enough about all aspects of security that I could really, as I come in as the genius and then, oh my God, it's like, I found everything about that needs to be found out. You want to have strategic assessments with companies that know how to do this. You want to probably do some offensive security poking around the company, and not just like a simple pen test, but really something that is full scope, so to speak. So red teaming. You want to take a look at the threat landscape that the company faces. And those kind of things for me come at a little bit of a later time, like once you start to really understand what's going on, but they definitely need to be part of your planning process as well.
If I could piggyback off of what you just said about some of the things that come over in the long term, let's talk about the 30, 60, 90-day timeframe for a leader, strategic leadership. What are some of the things, to the extent that you can share, that part of the 30, 60, 90-day implementation, even though you have an eye to the strategic vision of the organization? Mm-hmm. What are some of those things that fall within the first 3 months of a transitional leadership from a security perspective?
I would say it depends a little bit again on the size of the organization and the size of the complexity of the of where you go. If you go into a Fortune 10 company, there's a lot to learn. It's like learning is probably going to be a huge element of the first 90 days, just to really understand who the people are that you're actually dealing with. If you go into a startup with 20 folks, then learning the people is actually pretty quick, because it's like that's a bunch of meetings, and then you're done, and then you can really roll up your sleeves and get to work. So I don't think there's a one size fits all,
Right.
right? Like there's typical things that you would do for organizations of certain sizes, certain complexities, certain market segments, right? If you start thinking about if I were to go into a highly regulated industry like in healthcare or government or what have you, the first 30 days would be looking somewhat differently if I'm versus like going into some larger company perhaps that is totally unregulated, right? That is just
Right.
like moving at the speed of light, pretty much in terms of moving forward. So I'm always somewhat skeptical. It's like, oh, you got it within the first 30 days, you got to do X, Y, and Z, and then 60 days you need to have X, Y, and Z. This is achieved, etc. That feels too much cookie cutter. And it's like, I think it's not really taken consideration of what I was saying before, is like really learning the business, really understanding what the motivators for the company writ large and the individuals that are making up the company looks like. But having said that, it's like there's always it's like, but there are a couple of things you can do. It's like I said, it's like meet the right people. It's like meet your team, right? It's like if you're coming into a security team, you really want to understand how the security team works. There's no question about that, because I mean those are the guys and gals that you're working with on a daily basis. So it's like what their motivators, what their concerns and challenges are. I think that's most important, right? It's like get the team. They get to learn the team, get behind the team in any way, shape possible. And that, depending on the size of the team, that can take some time. I think the next step then is like obviously work with the stakeholders, right? Like I was saying before, legal, sales, finance, HR, literally across the entire security tends to be a very all-encompassing disciplines. Like there's everything that we do can negatively or positively impact the security. So you really want to make sure you understand everything at the horizontal level, but also at the vertical level, right? It's like you want to make sure that you get the opportunity to talk to senior leadership, to talk to the board, to talk to those folks that are really having risk on their mind in a language, in a way that is relevant to them, right? It's like if you're going in, well, I found X, Y, and Z vulnerabilities in my first week. It's like, yeah, good job. But it's like that doesn't necessarily mean something for somebody who's looking at how to develop the corporation over the next 2 or 3 years. Right, so it's like really find the right level of find the right audience, find the right level, and talk to them. Then it's like I said, it's like I think it's like understanding the long-term, midterm, and long-term strategy for the company. It's like understanding the business goals, the way to the company aims to achieve them. I think it's critical in terms of like moving forward your strategy. So that could be in the kind of like 60-day category if you want. So really starting to formulate that. And then in parallel, really starting those kind of external assessments that I was talking about. Is like, what's this really, it's like independent third party think about the overall security posture that we have today. It's like, does that compare to industry standards of where we are? How does it look from an offensive security perspective? It's like, if we can start to phish people, it's like, how does that feel? It's like, is there lateral movement in the networks? Do we have the necessary controls in place to prevent, but also then react to potential security issues as they may arise? And going through all those kind of things, then that would be something of more of a 90-day. And then it's really rinse and repeat. It's like the threat landscape never stands still. Technology certainly never stands still. People move forward, business changes, customer expectations, regulatory expectations change on an ongoing basis. And as all those kind of things forward, you really need to make sure that what you've done the first couple of weeks, months, really adjusts appropriately with what you're doing in the long term.
Wonderful. To me, the biggest takeaway from everything you just went over, and you mentioned some really great points, but the biggest takeaway for me is building those relationships ahead of time, so that when you hit the ground running, you already know how people react, what they like to do, where there's needs for improvement. I think once you solidify that, it makes it an easier transition. So that's one of the biggest takeaways for me, as far as what you just covered.
Makes sense. Yeah, I think that's super important.
Right. The COVID-19 pandemic has made many organizations adapt their operations by transitioning into working remote for a large majority of their employees. What are some of the major risks that this sudden change comes to the cybersecurity industry? And what strategies did you implement to ensure a smooth transition?
So the industry, I think, has been really, so the cybersecurity industry has been in some ways a wonderful opportunity to really start to rethink some of the controls, some of the technologies that are being used. I think for us as implementing companies, there's been definitely a bunch of challenges. The first couple of weeks of the lockdowns really where it's like, how can I actually make sure that my employees can still work like at all, right? It's like, I mean, there were simple or seemingly simple challenges like, does everybody have a laptop? It's like, no. It's like some people didn't. It's like, how do you get laptops out there? It's like in a time when there was really a shortage of laptops because everybody needed one. It's like going over monitors, webcams, right? It's like the whole 9 yards. There's a lot of those kind of trivial things. Network bandwidth on the last mile was an issue, and definitely in more than just one or two areas. It's like where suddenly literally hundreds and hundreds of people were going online during the day, some of them streaming, some of them trying to work. Everybody's like transporting video signals in some form or another. The bandwidth was just sometimes not there, both at the residential or at the last mile, as well as at the VPN concentrators or some of the data centers where companies were just set up to have people work from the office and not having to provide like massive amount of VPN stuff. So from that perspective, I think it's like just adjusting to this situation that you went from, depending on what kind of company, where almost zero work from home to 100% work from home, literally overnight in some cases. So I think there were huge logistical challenges, huge operational challenges. It's like which was really part and parcel of the capability of the IT teams and the security teams to move things forward. So it was really important to be a very agile in terms of your rollout. And I think those companies that have been most deeply invested in software as a service infrastructures, zero trust kind of infrastructures, we're really getting away the easiest. It's like, I remember it's like we at LogMeIn at the time, we had pretty much everything on the business back end, wherever possible. It's like as software as a service kind of a setup. It's like appropriate identity protections, etc. And then really moving things forward in a most efficient kind of a way. So it's like from that perspective, those kinds of things were most critical.
I've spoken to some CISOs in the past, whether be it on the podcast, webinars, or just conversations on the hallways. One of the things that was a big challenge during the pandemic was when people are now fully working remote, not all employees are going to be within the boundaries of, let's say, the United States. Some people may be in Spain, some people may be in Cuba. What are some of the challenges that come with that kind of a diversified and widespread workforce? Do you have bigger threats if people are working, let's say Eastern Standard Time hours, but they're based, let's say, in Spain or somewhere in Europe? Is that an issue that you guys face?
I would say from a security from an IT perspective, logistics and coordination, meetings, actually time zone politeness to some extent definitely was an issue as well. It's like, hey, I got to schedule a meeting. It's like, oh, I never realized it was 2 o'clock in the morning in, I don't know, India or Australia or whatever. It's like, I think it happened to a lot of us, all of us who've not been really used to that. So it's like driving that was really important. It's like making sure that we were able to still continue working appropriately. I think from a security perspective, one of the things that was really a problem at the beginning was along the lines of that we really ended up being in a situation where we were no longer able to reach employees the same way we were able to reach them while they were in the office, right? It's like in the office, we have digital signage, we have posters, we have outreach, we have little flyers, or all kinds of ways of really interacting with employees in a very dynamic kind of a way, reminding them of their security responsibilities, reinforcing security awareness over and over again. And that kind of like went out the window again overnight, right? It's like, along with the fact that a lot of people were really concerned about what was going on. It's like from a health perspective, from a economic perspective, et cetera. So there was a lot of a lot of lack of focus, I should say. It's like, that's something, you know what I mean, right? It's like, it was really a lot of focus on other topics that were more important to employees at the time, everybody at the time. So that security to some extent started to take a step back. And it's like, if you recall, the initial phishing phishing activities and scams and ransomware that really started at that time were focused around the pandemic, around the lockdowns. It's like the Johns Hopkins University map application, which was like kind of silly in and by itself. It was really successful in getting a lot of bad code on people's machines because people were clamoring for information. So that breakdown of communications from the security teams to the individual employees in the very beginning of the lockdowns, I think was problematic, right? People were clicking stuff because out of fear, because of they were interested in terms of what was going on, et cetera, et cetera. And those kind of things really made it hard. I think we've adjusted fairly well over time by changing the way we interact with each other, the way we started to do all kinds of it's like online meetings, coffee hours, or it's like Thursday afternoon is like just a happy hour, whatever. It's like those kind of things that really brought people together. And I think that really made a difference in terms of the ability to reach out. It's like, I remember we had back in the days at LongMeIn, we used to have virtual, we used to have security escape rooms, right? To get people interested. It's like playing around with stuff. And it's like really the classical escape room kind of thing. The team was able to move this over to a virtual escape room for that. And as a matter of fact, it's like we ultimately replaced the boring computer-based training for employee onboarding with that virtual escape room. It was ultimately actually a success. So I think there's a lot of good stuff that came out of it, but it definitely took a while to really get those kind of communication flows going.
That's interesting. I had never heard of the virtual escape room, but it's definitely something that I probably should try with my teams here at Process IT.
Yeah, no, it's great fun, and it's a much more playful. Is that the gamification of some of the learning stuff? I think has really been one of the best developments in terms of how we deal with security overall. It's like going away from these, like, here's a half hour worth of slides you got to click through, which nobody did. It's like, and nobody paid attention. It's like, let's be all real. To something where you really have to, in some form or another, interact with your respective peers. I think that makes a huge difference with regards to how sticky the content ultimately gets. Because it's like, if it becomes an interactive kind of a setting, it is much more of a topic that people engage with and then take more learnings from it.
IT and information security have been front and center for supporting workforces around the world. And at the same time, as companies were dealing with business disruptions and loss of revenue, what recommendations can you share on how to influence corporate leaders to invest in cybersecurity when revenues may have fallen across the board due to the pandemic?
There's always the shortfall in budgets that we're facing, right? It's like whether it's a lockdown, a pandemic, economic downturn. I mean, I think, look, it's like security is not the only thing that is relevant and important. There's many other aspects of a business that are very relevant as well, and that need to be balanced against security goals. I think what it really comes down to, like I was talking in the beginning, is like an organization really needs to understand the security and risk posture it has, and then identify for itself whether that's acceptable or not, right? It's like there's a lot of different ways in terms of like how you could deal with a security risk. You can mitigate it in some form or another by lowering the likelihood. You can lower the potential impact an event may have, which is that's the traditional kind of way of looking at security. But it's like you can also transfer risk, right? It's like you get a cyber insurance. Is that going to have an impact on your business if you have an event? Absolutely, but at the very least, you're capable of recovering portions of, or maybe it's like a lot of the a potential loss that you may be facing from a problematic event. You can also accept the risk, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it's like if it comes down to being able to go to the market fast, or securing your systems in the long run, sometimes you just want to accept the risk and say, like, look, it's like we know probably something bad's going to happen on the way. We don't know exactly what it's going to be. We want to mitigate this to the extent possible, but we have to take this risk, because if we don't, then the risk of us going out of business would be bigger. So long story around is like how you would deal with these kind of things. At the end of the day, the rationalization around whether I want to invest in security or how I want to look at the security really comes back to is like, where do I stand from a security posture, risk posture perspective? Is that commensurate with my goals? Is like, is not investing security something that I can afford? Right? Because if you look at secondary and tertiary effects of what can happen, you may end up being in a position where losing your customer's confidence in your ability to deliver a secure service may ultimately take down your business, or not, right? So it's like these kind of calculations really have to get into play. And based on that, I think it really then comes down to an investment decision. It's like, do we invest more in security? Do we keep it even, or do we maybe even remove some funding from security in order to be able to fund other activities in the company? Having said that, it's like, I think one thing that's super important is like the security and the threat landscape changes on a constant basis. And I usually like to compare it's like driving a security program like swimming upriver, right? It's like if you exert some force, you have to exert some force, you have to exert some growth and some strength just to stay where you are. Otherwise, you've got to be washed down the river, right? So if you stop it in terms of what's going on, your security posture is going to go down over time just because of the way things work. You have to really actively move forward, and that comes sometimes with additional investment, that comes sometimes with restructuring of the kind of resources you have at the time. But standing still and just hoping that everything is going to stay the way you are is definitely going to increase your security exposure.
Going into your new role at Sprinklr, what are some of the strategic initiatives that you believe a new leader should focus on to obtain buy-in from their teams and also to build a strong foundation following the negative impact of the pandemic?
I think what's really important at this point in time is to make sure that all the good stuff that we already have is fully accounted for, and that we can, like I said, it's like really align the business objectives that we have for the company with the security program itself, right? It's like security programs, like I said, never stand on their own. It's like they're not in an empty space. And it's like as the company moves forward and grows quickly across the board, across a large variety of customers that we're serving, we really need to make sure that the security program supports these. So, for example, we earlier this year, it's like we achieved a FedRAMP readiness status for our products, which means that they are ready to be used in the context of federal activities, which is awesome. It's like this is really great to see the possibility of a much improved customer experience, not only in the commercial sector, but also for citizens. It's like really making the interaction with the IRS or the Social Security Administration more pleasant. I know it's like, can sound like a little weird, but it's like, I think we can get there. But it's like that in order to be able to get to that point, it's obviously very important to meet all the kind of requirements that are very different from a public sector perspective versus like a private sector perspective. And security can play definitely a big role in this. So it's like helping to move those kind of strategic initiatives forward, I think is going to be a very important point as we move on.
Digital risk management is now in the forefront of business models with the increase of remote workers. What are some of the emerging threats that companies need to prepare for going forward?
So, I mean, it's like it's usually what's the crystal ball for 2021 and 22, right? It's like that's
no one could have predicted that.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, I think there's a couple of interesting trends happening across the board. I think what we are seeing, which is to some extent a result of the experiences that a lot of companies had during the lockdowns and the sudden explosion of work from home, is that the reliance on a utility computing model, like through software as a service, that has shown to be very resilient, right? It's like if you run your own email server from a basement, and suddenly nobody can get to that basement anymore because you can't go there because everything's closed down, that spells trouble. It's like, just realistically speaking, and obviously it hasn't been that bad for most companies, but it's like, I mean, that's the general kind of just where you're going. If you instead are capable of really relying on the expertise and really the knowledge of service companies to provide you with, like I said, it's like a utility form of computing across critical business functions that you're not an expert in yourself, then I think that's a much more sane model forward. So it's like the security challenges around that are going to be, it's like, okay, how do we now really integrate all these things securely? Because if we don't, then we see that employees are starting to go off and say, like, hey, it's like, I really want to do X, Y, and Z, but the company's collaboration platform or information sharing platform or whatever is like, doesn't really support it. You know what? I'm just going to open up a new Google account and then I'm just going to put it on Google Drive. What can possibly go wrong, right? Yeah. So those kind of making sure that the organizations are agile and resilient enough in order to be able to address the needs from employees while still maintaining this high degree of resiliency across the business operations. I think that's going to be it's a theme and topic for the next couple of years as we revisit our business continuity plans, as we are starting to really look more into making sure that security can actually help to drive those kind of topics forward. And this kind of change, obviously, to a more service-oriented utility style computing does come with a bunch of changes. You can't rely on just surrounding everything with a firewall and then calling it a day. It's like, that's just not working any longer. So it's like, you have to think about what is the new perimeter. And as I've been saying for a while now, that does, like, as the firewall as a traditional kind of security control becomes less relevant, the identity of the users that are interacting with you is becoming more and more important. So it's like securing the ability to identify the users through appropriate single sign-on, multi-factor, biometric, whatever is appropriate in this kind of context, I think is really important. And then really making sure that all the applications that rely on things are capable of actually leveraging this kind of identity, and then starting to move forward. I think there are other things. It's like, we've seen that ransomware is like just stubbornly not going away. So I think eradicating the abilities there is like going to be hard. We've seen that patching stuff is as we know how important patching is. At the same time, we're seeing how hard it sometimes can be to patch stuff. So I think those kind of operational excellency topics, they're going to be front and center for a lot of discussions as well.
Earlier, when you were talking about how to handle risk, so accept the risk, transfer, mitigate, and so on and so forth, it reminded me of how people handle risk in project and program management. And that's actually my background. And I was curious to know, what role does project management play in your profession, and what strategies have you utilized to ensure its effectiveness?
So very good point. It's like, I think project managers are sometimes the most underappreciated team members in the security teams. It's like, I would make the case that if you have any kind of reasonably complex security program, security initiative in order to drive forward, you cannot do this without program management. That's just absolutely not possible. Because like I was saying earlier, it's like security tends to interact with a lot of parts of an organization or company, right? It's like, you have to talk to HR in order to make things work. You have to talk to finance, IT, it's like operations departments, like sales, coordinating all those kind of interactions with people who are more centered around the security, like driving the security technology, is going to be insanely complicated, and it's like, it's not effective. Right? It's like, if I have somebody who's really good at creating new infrastructure on AWS in a very secure way, I don't want them to do program management, because A, they're not very good at this, and B, it distracts them from the stuff that they are good at. So I think every security team should have at least one project or program manager to help them organize those kind of complicated tasks. Look at, for example, identity management across an organization, right? It's like including not only setting up single sign-on, but it's like including onboarding and offboarding processes for employees or contractors. Those are really complicated business processes you need to take a look at that really affect pretty much the entire organization. And it's like just relying on a really good security engineer is not going to get you there. It's like they may eventually be able to crack that nut as well, because they're usually pretty smart. But it'll take longer, it'll be harder, and it won't be as pleasant an experience. So I think that's why I love program management across the board.
Gerald, there's a lot of questions that I can keep asking you because I know you're a treasure trove of information, especially when it comes to information security. But I have one last question for you. This is one of the favorite questions that I like asking all my guests. What has helped you get to where you are, and what word of advice would you give to someone that wants to pursue a career that's similar to yours?
Oh boy, it's like, would I advise anyone to pursue a career similar to mine? It's like, that's an open question, but it's like if you set your mind to it, it's like there's a lot of things to peel on. You have to get engaged. It's like you have to really get into the down and dirty in terms of like what security means. You have to understand what's going on, but it's like also still keep in mind the whole thing about people, process, and technology, right? It's like this is not only about finding out what the latest greatest mousetrap is, and then it's like setting it up as a security. You have to be interested in making sure that you become a teacher, a mentor, an educator, whatever it's like in terms of like helping other people understand the relevancy of security as you move forward. So I think it's like somebody who wants to get into this kind of general line of business and further. Start to play with stuff. It's like start to play with the systems, start to play with processes, be interested in understanding how things work, and sometimes also how to break them, because that's usually how the adversary works. And it's like that's a larger topic of, it's like you have to think like an adversary. It's like you have to think, it's like how could I possibly attack X, Y, and Z, because then it really becomes real, and then you can start to devise about the second step, which is like, okay, now I know how to break things. How do I prevent them from breaking? I usually like to say that people ought to be passionate about stuff, and it's like I still maintain that. But sometimes you also need to realize that when you're not particularly good at something, it's hard to be passionate about it, right? It's like if you really stink at putting, I don't know, whatever together, it's like then it's not as fun, right? It's like, and as you really learn more about an area, as you get deeper and deeper into it, it becomes more interesting, and you automatically, to some extent, hopefully, become more engaged and more passionate about it. So it's like, but seeing whether your engagement with security topics, with people, process, and technology actually gets you excited. It's like if you see that that's moving forward, then it's like just follow your passion.
Gerald, thanks a lot for coming on the show and sharing your insights with us. I'm really looking forward to catching up with you in the near future.
Thank you, Fred. It's like this was a lot of fun. It's like, and hope to see you soon.
Thanks.